So Aristotle. This is a reasonably kind of long slideshow, but I'm probably going to go through it also fairly quickly. Aristotle was part of the big three, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle also was a kind of teacher of Alexander the Great. I mean, I'm not sure we know much about what he taught Alexander the Great, but he did go on to do great things. So maybe Aristotle helped. Aristotle is especially known for his like breadth of what he did. So more than any other philosopher up to that point, he kind of covered lots of different areas. He did morality, he did aesthetics, which is the study of back then, of sort of study of what's beautiful and what's and tragedy. He did logic, setting out what it meant to make a logical argument. He did sort of approaches in what it means for something to be well-based scientifically. He studied politics, and he studied a lot of metaphysics, and we'll be covering some of those issues. He wrote a lot of stuff. Some of it is fairly elegant. Some of it is more like lecture notes, but there's a lot of Aristotle to be studied. Interestingly, estimates are that maybe only about 1/3 of his original works have survived. So maybe he wrote a lot of other stuff too, which we don't know about. Certainly, we think of Aristotle as having been highly influential in subsequent centuries, indeed subsequent millennia. And certainly his idea that the Earth was the center of the universe was long held, at least until people like Kepler and Galileo replaced it. He did a lot of work in the biological sciences, especially the study of marine life, some of which has survived. I mean, I think it's sort of hit and miss about how good it was, but some of it was pretty good. And a lot of his ideas about logic still are used today. We'll be especially thinking about his metaphysics, and that was profoundly influential for kind of basically hundreds of years, if not more. And in some ways, it's still influential. Still, some people still use his approach. And there are plenty of Aristotle scholars. People still find him very relevant. We're going to spend quite a lot of our time comparing Plato and Aristotle. We've already looked at Plato. And one way to kind of label Plato is as a rationalist. He says that there are kind of independent truths known either through kind of like a process of reflection or intellectual scrutiny, and that's generally characterized as a rationalist approach. Aristotle was both a rationalist and an empiricist, so like he used some of Plato's methods, but at the same time he was much more open to using his senses. He wanted to go and examine the world. I mentioned he was a marine biologist, so he went out there and kind of looked at sea creatures and cut them open and tried to understand them. So that's very much a kind of scientific empiricist approach. And he thought that was a very, doing that kind of observation was very important for knowledge. He created a school called, he got called the Lyceum, and he himself had studied at Plato's Academy, and he was head of the Lyceum for quite a while. He did leave Athens during a time of political turbulence. He had been affiliated with Alexander the Great, when the Athenians started to sort of turn on Alexander the Great, or at least after his death, they turned on the followers. Aristotle left Athens because he was afraid of his life, and he said Athens must not be allowed to sin twice against philosophy. The first, quote, sin against philosophy was against Socrates when the Athenians condemned Socrates to death. He didn't want to be condemned to death. The foundations of his school were rediscovered in 1996, not that long ago, and they're actually, although in some ways we say it was outside of Athens, it was outside of ancient Athens. It's actually now well within the city of Athens. So to see a little of the contrast between Plato and Aristotle, you can see that reflected in their approaches into their schools. So in Plato's academy, it was like a center of higher learning. People didn't have to pay money to go there. Plato had people who were sponsoring him. They were wealthy enough to kind of make it all happen. We don't really know the details about how that happened, but he had patrons. And they discussed kind of abstract issues in metaphysics and ethics and knowing the truth, but it was all at this kind of higher level. While Aristotle, his Lyceum wasn't just all about like metaphysics. There they studied biology and kind of politics. They also studied ethics and logic. So like they covered all sorts of things. And there was an emphasis on this like more scientific approach, trying to kind of actually go out there and look at the world. They were known as the Peripatetics because Aristotle would walk while lecturing. I guess he didn't have a blackboard, didn't have a smart board of any kind. And I guess his students were willing to kind of follow him around. It's not a method of teaching you see much these days. So also in this Lyceum, they had a kind of gardens and a gym and a library. So you could have all sorts of self-improvement. And the lectures were open to everyone. So it wasn't exclusive in the same way that Plato's academy had been exclusive. They discussed a lot of different things. You had senior members leading research and mentoring junior members, and generally trying to get more knowledge. So it's an indication that Athens was a friendly place for that kind of scholarship. It wasn't about who you were. It wasn't like you didn't have to come from a noble family. You just had to be able to kind of understand enough so you could engage in the discussion. So it was a kind of civil center, good for education. And it was all free. All right. So now comparing Plato and Aristotle with regards to their metaphysical views, we've seen with Plato that he puts a lot of emphasis on the idea of the realm of the forms as being like, that's the true reality. That's the realm of unchanging eternal archetypes. And then you also have like unchanging souls there, kind of numbers, geometrical shapes. It's all about eternal, unchanging things. And he thinks that's like the realm of forms. And he says, yeah, there's also the material world. That's all totally imperfect. And like Heraclitus thought about the world, it's constantly changing. Plato said that we shouldn't really put much emphasis on our senses and the knowledge we get from our senses. The real knowledge comes from just our intellect. So Aristotle's approach was much more monistic rather than dualistic. Aristotle didn't believe in like there was these two separate realms. Rather, he thought that he did have this idea of forms, but for forms, They were what gave something structure, and it wasn't in the form of something, wasn't in a separate realm, rather it's within the object itself. So any particular object is is a combination of matter kind of collected together in a certain shape, that's its form, and the form is within the object. It's not like some sort of separate thing. So in some ways, it seems that Aristotle's approach is much more kind of straightforward. There's no sort of weird realm of forms out there. And he emphasizes we can know the forms of things and that we can know about objects through observing them. So here's a sort of contrast between the two. For Plato, the forms are separate, they're in an ideal realm. For Aristotle, they're immanent. Immanent means within the object. So Plato's view is very dualistic. Aristotle's is unified, monistic. Plato, rather like Parmenides, sees a lot of the change, if not actually an illusion, the changes you see in the world just are not really very real. They're not what's important. Whereas Aristotle thought the physical world was really what there is, and that's very important. Plato thinks all knowledge comes from reason and sometimes from innate ideas, from recollecting ideas we're born at birth with. He doesn't think we get stuff through senses. Well, Aristotle does think we get our knowledge through senses, but also some analysis of that. We'll talk a little bit more about how he builds on experience. So Aristotle's four causes. They're always known as the four causes, although it's not particularly helpful terminology. I think a better way to understand the four causes is four different ways of explaining what happens or what there is in the world. And certainly the material cause and the efficient cause are pretty simple and very familiar to us. So the material cause is like just asking, what's it made of? So if a statue, you have a statue, you say, what's it made of? You say, well, it's made of marble, or maybe other statues will be made of other stuff. But so material cause it answers a very simple question, what's it made of? The efficient cause is what created it. So the efficient cause for a sculpture would be the sculptor, the person who chiseled it and made it. Obviously, sometimes things are going to be complicated. There's going to be more than one creator. If you're making a movie or a TV series, there's lots of creators. But in simple cases, you'd have one person creating. And then you're going to have natural phenomena. You ask, like, why is it raining now? And presumably the efficient cause is there's like clouds in the sky. They contain water in one form, and a change in conditions in the atmosphere or the winds or whatever it is causes droplets to fall from the cloud. So then that would be the efficient cause of a rainstorm. So that's pretty much what we would call the scientific cause. So that's a very familiar idea. I think the idea of the final cause is easy to understand, and we'll talk about that in a second. I think the hardest thing to understand is the formal cause, because it seems to be different sorts of things in different cases. So for a statue, the formal cause is like what makes the matter the thing it is. And so for a statue, it's just its shape. If you have a statue of David, it's a famous Greek statue, then what makes it a statue of David is its shape. In other cases, for example, if you look at a tree, then the formal cause of the tree is going to be a different sort of thing to uh, explain. I mean, shape is part of it, but a tree has an organic unity, and so the formal cause is some kind of element of treeness, which you're going to have to try and talk about. And for Aristotle, uh, when it comes to people, he says that the formal cause of a human being is a person's soul, which is very different from its shape. But then we'll talk what he means by soul in a little bit. So the formal cause is a bit tricky to understand, although like in the case of physical objects like a statue, that's pretty straightforward. The final kind of cause we want to talk about is the final cause. Final cause, there's a lot of tricky terminology that we're going to be using. So final cause itself is a kind of unusual phrase, but it means the goal. We're going to be using other words that also are related to that. So we're going to be talking about telos and teleology and entelechi. And all of those kind of are somewhat unusual words. So it takes a little getting used to the terminology. But the basic idea that we were going to be looking at for final causes and telos is the idea that things have a purpose. So in Aristotle's view, everything has a purpose. Now that's easy to understand in things that are created by humans. Now, if you look at a water bottle, the purpose of a water bottle is for people to drink out of. And the purpose of a window is to see through. The purpose of a chair is for people to be able to sit on it. So it's easy to understand how human-made objects all have purposes. And we can also understand, like, sometimes they break. So like a chair may be broken, so then it sort of has a purpose to be sat on, but it's not actually functioning properly. That's easy to understand. But Aristotle's view is going to be that it's not just human-made objects that have purposes, everything has a purpose. So we used to this idea of purposeness, which is a hard word to say. And I think we can understand how these parts of, say, the human body have purposes. So, for example, the purpose or function of the eyes is to see. The function of the ears is to hear. The function of the taste buds is to taste. So we can easily identify a purpose there, and you can talk about, well, what does that enable you to do? You know, if you can sense the world, then you're able to navigate around the world. You're able to pursue food, pursue prey. You're able to run from predators. You can see how your senses serve a function. You can also look at other parts of the body. The function of the lungs is to give you oxygen, to breathe in air. The function of the heart is to pump blood. So it's easy for us to understand how like parts of a human body have functions. Aristotle's view is that everything has a function. So every human has a function, every animal has a function, every plant has a function. And that's going to be a little harder to understand. Now, Aristotle thinks these purposes are in the object itself. When we can easily distinguish that from Plato's view. Plato thinks that anything like a function or the ideal nature of something is in the world of the forms. It's totally separate from the physical world. But Aristotle thinks everything is kind of unified and it's all kind of together. So there's this word entelechi, which is kind of not only a hard word to say, but it's also a hard word to kind of pin down exactly what it means. But it's something about kind of the realization of something's purpose, or the realization of its full potential. So Plato, as we've seen, Plato's view of purpose is like he has these ideas about the ideal forms, and they sort of tell you what the purposes of things are in an ideal way. And then he says the things in the physical world, they are just basically bad copies of the ideal thing. So Aristotle's view is quite different. And so he thinks that every being strives to achieve kind of its purpose as part of its nature. But that's quite a big claim about the world. I mean, he puts a lot of emphasis on the idea that we should get our knowledge from observing the world. And that seems a bit of a leap. You don't necessarily just observe that, but it also has quite a lot of plausibility. So the example of an acorn is a pretty good one. This slide we have an acorn, and acorns they fall from the tree. They kind of get somewhat buried in the ground, and then they will grow into an oak tree. So the function of an acorn is to eventually become a full adult oak tree. So it has its purpose within it. That's Aristotle's view. And certainly, I mean, although we may not directly observe that, that has like a certain plausibility to how we see the world. So he thinks there's like this ontology is a kind of inner principle in something, enabling it to achieve its full potential and natural purpose. So we can sort of understand that with acorns and oak trees. But he thinks it's true of basically every living thing. And that seems like doesn't seem like a bad way to do your biology, to try and find out the function of everything in biology. Whether or not it's like going to be completely successful is not so clear, but it seems like at least a good way to start out. So this idea of ontology is about how natural entities contain the principles of their own development and growth internally. And so for an acorn, he doesn't think there's anything sort of supernatural in an acorn. There's just stuff in the acorn which will allow it to grow into an oak tree. And it isn't external to it, it's sort of internal to it. So it's pretty obvious that Aristotle's view is a lot closer to what we may think of as modern science than Plato's view. If you study modern science, you're not going to hear about any world of forms. So Plato's view is quite strange, where Aristotle's view seems much more like regular science. This kind of chart sort of summarizes the basic differences between Plato and Aristotle there. So it's definitely helpful to be aware of this word teleology. Teleology is the idea that everything has a function built into it. Like I said, like with acorns, that seems pretty obvious. It's going to be less obvious with some other biological entities. And certainly, if you think about like a mountain, it's going to be far less obvious what its teleology is. Yet it seems that on Aristotle's view, everything in the world has a kind of teleology to it. His view is basically that the world has a sort of harmony or meaning to it, so everything kind of fits together. Everything is sort of designed so that it can all work together. And ontology is sort of the inner principles that keep that going. So that takes us to the part of Aristotle, which isn't quite religious, but it's sort of like the closest he gets to religion. He thinks like there's a sort of scale of nature, and the bottom of the scale you have neutral matter, but the top of the scale is an unmoved mover. So what he's saying is there has to be a cause of this harmony of the universe. Now that cause is not like a of God, and we'll talk a little bit more about what he means by the unmoved mover in a little bit. But he spends, I don't know if he ever really talks about the teleology of mountains. He is pretty focused on biological entities. And he has this view which sounds pretty weird if you use the word soul, which is basically what people use. He says every biological thing, every living thing has a soul. But what he means by that is not like it has like some kind of little uh, kind of glowing thing in it, which is going to go to heaven when it dies. It just means that it has an inner principle that gives it something, gives it a purpose. And so the kind of soul of plants is to kind of grow and kind of get energy from its, you get roots, the roots getting energy from the soil, the leaves can absorb energy from the sun, they can reproduce. So that's what plants do. So he's saying that plants have a kind of soul, but it's not nothing supernatural, it's nothing religious. It's more like a biological idea that the plants just have this ability to live. Then animals have those similar vegetative abilities, but they also have the ability to sense and respond to the environment. Certainly, we think animals can experience pleasure and pain. I think a lot of people would say that animals can experience some emotions. So the sensitive soul gives you that stuff. So any animal is going to have some ability to sense the world. So when Aristotle says you have a sensitive soul, it simply means you're able to have sensations and you're able to negotiate the world through your experience, and pleasure and pain are going to be relevant there too. Then he gets to humans and he says, well, humans are rational animals. So we have everything other animals have, but we also have rationality. So we have the ability to kind of think in a rational way. And he thinks that's especially what defines humans. And so it's important for us to be able to use our rationality in life. He talks about quite a lot about how to use the senses. So unlike Plato, he thinks we can trust our senses to understand the world around us. When you're crossing the road, you look to see if there's a chariot coming, and if there isn't, you can cross the road. So it seems like we can certainly use our senses. It is true that our senses can be mistaken. And so he thinks that we have to kind of gather information in more sophisticated ways. You can ask other people what they see. You can kind of think about what you see and analyze it. Certainly, you can use your different sensory systems to try and see if what you're seeing is real. So it certainly makes sense that you can be thoughtful about your senses. And he makes distinctions between active reason and passive reason, which he certainly thinks active reason is the highest form of reason. And he definitely thinks that that's what's special about humans, that we have this active reason. And he thinks that active reasoning gives us pleasure. And we're going to talk a little bit more about pleasure in a second. So for Aristotle, it's very important. Our function, our purpose is to think. Going back to this idea of the unmoved mover, he postulates it's a kind of like a theoretical entity that there's something which made the world as it is, caused everything. I mean, that's definitely an idea you see in religion. Often people, when they say they believe in God because the universe must have come from somewhere, so they say God must have made the universe. In some ways, Aristotle has a similar sort of argument, but he's not talking about any kind of personal God. Rather, he's saying like there's the natural world, and the unmoved mover is like a part of the natural world, but it's a very kind of powerful, sophisticated thing in some ways. Uh, so he thinks there has to be something that otherwise the world you couldn't explain the world. So Aristotle is not really religious, but he uses some ideas which kind of seem related to religion. And we've talked about the idea, he has this idea of the soul, but his view of the soul is basically kind of a biological view. It's not, he doesn't think it's immaterial or anything like that. He thinks that the soul and the body are united into a single substance. The soul isn't a different substance. It's just like the organizing principle of the body. What gives the structure and life to the body. So when you die, when your physical body dies, there isn't any kind of soul that goes on living. When your body dies, you die. So he totally rejects the idea of immortality that you saw in Plato or Pythagoras. He thinks that our days are numbered and we don't live any further on. So you can see how different his view is from Plato. Even though Plato was his teacher, he disagrees on so many different points. So yeah, he says stuff like soul is the actuality of the body, and it's what keeps the body alive. All things are made of matter shaped by form. His view is very kind of different from Plato's. We've seen his hierarchy of souls, so that fits in pretty well with what we've done before. And Aristotle's view, as I've been emphasizing, is very different from Plato's dualist view. He thinks that there's just one kind of stuff in the world, this matter, organized in different ways. So his approach is we might think of it as much more kind of scientific, much less inclined to ideas about kind of mysterious different realms. And certainly Aristotle's approach had a lot of influence on subsequent science. He also talked about how to live a good life and how to organize society well. And he has very distinctive views about that. And in some ways, it's probably his ethics which have been the most kind of well accepted, and still many philosophers today think his views about ethics are basically right, although there's some aspects of his ethics they would really disagree with. So one of his kind of central ideas is that basically what the point of life is to flourish. Flourishing is like a state of being, it's not a feeling. So one idea that's very strong with Aristotle is that the point of life is not to feel good. Rather, the point of life is to live well and fulfill yourself through reason and virtue. Now, he does think that generally a side effect of living well is that you feel good. But certainly you don't want to be, the point of life is not to try and make yourself feel good. The point of life is to lead a meaningful, good life. So pleasure should play a fairly small role in like deciding how you live life. So he has this word eudaimonia, which is generally kind of translated as flourishing. Sometimes more confusingly is translated as happiness. But I think one thing to remember on Aristotle's view, it's not just humans that can flourish. Any animal can flourish, even and plants can flourish. So you can look at a pot plant and see its shiny leaves, and you can see like it's flowering, and you think that plant is flourishing. So flourishing is your state of being. It's not your how you feel about yourself. And he thinks flourishing is really what we should be aiming for. And for Aristotle, he thinks flourishing is to be living virtuously and using your skills. Definitely, he doesn't think that fleeting pleasure is very worthwhile. So he thinks that humans have this natural ability to be rational, and that's what we should be focusing on, being rational in our lives. And being rational is for him pretty much the same thing as being virtuous. If irrational people will be virtuous. And it's all connected with this kind of teleological framework that he thinks everybody needs to play their role in the world, and then the world will make sense. So he thinks happiness, true happiness, is living your purpose. And yeah, pleasure will be a byproduct of that, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is like a sort of, we might translate it as like the idea of well-being. Well-being, it seems to be kind of to do with how you feel, but it's more than how you feel. It's like your state of being. So Aristotle makes this distinction between moral virtues. There would be things like courage. Courage we're very familiar with. Temperance is an important one. Temperance is an old-fashioned word for us, but it means something like moderation. So you're not going to extremes, especially in pleasures. So like we're aware of the temperance movement. That's a little confusing. The temperance movement was arguing that alcohol should be banned. Probably Aristotle would say you don't ban alcohol, but you don't get drunk all the time either. You just use it in moderation. And then ideas like justice. Justice is a pretty vague word. It means something to do with fairness and acting well, but it's a pretty vague word. So there's morality, and then there's the intellectual virtues, wisdom, understanding, and education is going to be very important for that. He thinks that the point of life is to live virtuously, and especially you live virtuously in a community. He thinks we're intrinsically social animals. Now, he was living in, for at least some of his life in ancient Athens, and he moved around. So you don't have to stay in the same community, but he thinks it's essential for humans to be part of a community. And people who like just go off and live in a hut somewhere with no interaction with other people, they are kind of going against their nature, because our nature is to be social. So we talked about temperance, and one of the very distinctive ideas of Aristotle is moderation. So he definitely thinks that you should learn self-control. And he thinks that the best life is lived according to the golden mean, which is probably an idea you've heard of before. It's basically the idea that you should go between an excess and a deficiency. It's a very common idea in different moral approaches. Maybe it's especially well known in Taoism, but certainly it's been highly influential in the Western tradition. And he talks about different spheres of action. So courage is one of them. So to be courageous is to, obviously, courage is involved, especially in battle. In battle, your life is at threat. People may kill you. But being courageous is you go out there, you fight, and you hopefully kill the other side. So certainly you want to avoid cowardice. Cowardice will be running away. So you can't be courageous if you're a coward. But he also says you shouldn't be rash. If you're in a battle, you just don't run out there without thinking about it and try and kill as many people as possible. If you haven't, because probably what's going to happen is like you're going to be hacked to death really quickly. So if you're just rash, that's not really courage either. That's just being stupid. So courage is like the middle part between the two extremes. So Aristotle kind of looks at different areas of life, and he kind of, so he thinks looks at areas of fear and confidence. That there's the mean is courage, pleasure and pain. The mean is temperance, and he looks at like getting and spending and honor and dishonor, and he looks at anger. I think anger is especially an interesting one for us these days. These days, many people would say that you should learn to deal with your anger and not be angry. Many people say anger is bad. Aristotle definitely says, like, if you've got a really kind of hot temper and you're losing your temper with people, that's not good. But if you never lose your, if you never get angry, he thinks that's a problem too. He thinks there's going to be some cases where it's actually pretty important to be angry, you know, because it's appropriate to be angry. So he thinks that the mean between the two excesses is kind of anger at the right times. So there's self-control, but anger is reasonable. My favorite area is his thought about conversation, because he says that it's a moral virtue, it's a good thing to do in life to be funny. That that's a good way of living. And if you just go on and you are boring, that's boorishness, that's a deficit. But if you're a clown and you just could play the fool, that's not good too. So you need to be witty. You need to be in the middle between the two extremes. And so he's one of the few philosophers who have recommended being funny. He doesn't tell many jokes in his writings, so we can't really tell how funny he was. But he said it was important to be funny. He also says, you know, I've said he thinks we're social animals, so it's important to get along with other people. So he says friendliness is very important. You can't be bad-tempered all the time. You can't be kind of in a bad mood all the time. But also, it's not a good idea just to be obsequious, to try and curry favor with people. And that seems to make a lot of sense. You know, if somebody says, I want to be your friend, I want to be your friend, and I'll do anything to be your friend, you're probably going to back off. You think, well, this doesn't, I don't want to, this is not a good situation. So you think it's good to be friendly, but you don't want to go too extreme. So his views about how to live seem to be sort of provocative, or not provocative, but at least kind of something we can relate to. So that's his moral philosophy. And now we're going to look a little at the distinction between Plato and Aristotle in their political views. All right. So Aristotle differed from Plato again. Plato was very against democracy. He thought it was basically democracy is like a mob rule. And he thought that democracy was bad for society, it leads to disorder and eventually tyranny. So Aristotle's proposal was that the philosophers should run society for the good of the state, and they should have the role of kings. They'd be philosopher kings. Whereas Aristotle has a kind of more complex view. He doesn't necessarily think that democracy is great, but he thinks it is good for people to play a part in running the country, running the state. So his preferred approach is polity. It's a mix of democracy and oligarchy, and a good kind of oligarchy. We'll see. There's other kinds of oligarchy he doesn't like. He classifies different governments in different ways. So it's fairly informative and kind of gives us a way of thinking about these philosophers, to think about their views about slavery. We think of Aristotle and Plato as being these great philosophers, but we need to be very aware that they hold views which we profoundly disagree with. So both Plato and Aristotle approved of slavery. Plato didn't do much to justify slavery. He just thought like it's just natural. Uh, Whereas Aristotle spends a lot more time trying to explain when slavery is justified. He doesn't think that Greek citizens should ever be slaves. But he thinks that it's okay for the Greeks to go and invade other countries and bring people back and use them as slaves. Because basically, he thinks that the Greeks are better than everyone else. So he thinks that some groups of people are just natural slaves. They don't have the capacity to run their own lives well, and so they're better off when their lives are devoted to slavery. It's easy to kind of see, well, that there are lots of problems with that view, and maybe we'll talk about those a little bit. All right. So you see, we talked about Plato previously, thinking about society. He has this image of the ship of state, and he thinks democracy is a kind of mob rule. He thinks that a ship should be led by trained captains. He thinks those are the philosopher kings. Whereas Aristotle has an idea of a kind of a more mixed view. That there's certainly going to be laws, and people will play a role in society, but there will also be kind of leaders having a lot of power. Plato has this extreme view, which is especially shocking to us now, in addition to his views about slavery, that in his ideal state, there should be no private families. When kids are born, they should be taken away from parents and looked after by the state. Seems like they're kind of an amazing kind of infringement of not just kind of rights, but what we think of as like a good way to raise kids. He thinks, no, like it's better off if the state raises kids. Aristotle is like much more pragmatic, and he thinks it's fine for parents to raise their own kids. But the government is going to be involved in some education. So I talked a lot about his idea that Aristotle's idea that the world is basically kind of everything has a natural purpose, and everything's natural purpose fits together. So he thinks that a city is like a natural institution. The polis, as he would talk about it, is a natural institution, and we need it for our own flourishing. So we are not just social animals, we're political animals. We need to live in some kind of city state. And he thinks it's natural for there to be a hierarchy with some people in power, some people having less power in the city state. And whoever's running the government should be aiming for the common good of the state, not for their own personal benefit. So that takes us to the different roles in society. So you can look at the rulers. The rulers are going to be virtuous and wise in his view, which is like, it seems like a great idea if we could find virtuous and wise rulers. And how you actually get them to be ruling is not an easy question. But he also thinks citizens need to participate in the running of the state. So it's not like a total rule. Citizens need to be active. They're going to be workers who are not slaves, who play an important role in the state. And he doesn't think those workers should be partaking in political decisions. And then at the bottom of the heap, there are the natural slaves. He says they lack rational self-governance. So their role is to serve others. I think one of the obvious things to say is it seems like what makes him think that there's a whole group of people who are not going to be good at running their own lives and are better off serving others. That seems very quick, very kind of is making a lot of assumptions. And if there are people who aren't able to live their own lives, why would they be better off working as slaves? Why wouldn't the state be just looking after them in some way? It just seems like it's a strange justification. So Aristotle thinks that this hierarchy is natural. We talked about the role of rulers and citizens, the non-citizens and labor. And certainly there's a lot of emphasis in all of this and the idea that everybody, especially those at the top, need to be virtuous. He classifies different government types in his work. So he definitely thinks what he calls polity is the best sort of government, but he kind of speaks approvingly of aristocracy and monarchy. He's against tyranny. Tyranny is when people are running a country tyrannically for their own benefit. Oligarchy, when it's just done for the benefit of those in charge. And he thinks democracy can be corrupt too. So he does a lot of work in that. I guess these days, I mean, one of the obvious things to think is that he's talking about something like ancient Athens with 100,000 people. It's a bit of a stretch to see how that can apply to modern 21st century states where things are very different. We might wonder about to what extent his political ideas are relevant, but it's good to have some idea of where he's coming from. Right. So we're just about at the end of Aristotle. Just to make a few comments. At the beginning, we talked about some of his influence. There's other influences he had, or people reacting either with him or against him. We're going to talk about the Stoics at some point, and the Stoics kind of are pretty strongly influenced by Aristotle, and they largely agree with him, but they take his ideas in different directions. While the Epicureans, will see, largely go against him in a lot of ideas. After Aristotle and like the fallout from Aristotle tended to be that kind of philosophy got lost, and especially with the rise of the Christian church in Western Europe, there wasn't much interest in philosophical debate, and there was some interest in theology. Well, that was a pretty minority approach. So it wasn't until like the 1500s, the Renaissance, when the Greek text got rediscovered in Western Europe, that philosophy really reignited. So there was a long time span when a kind of philosophy kind of was not very active in the West. So it's worth just mentioning a couple of these things in a little more detail. So Epicurus reacts against Aristotle by totally rejecting his idea that natural phenomena have inherent purposes or ends. So basically Epicurus's view of the physical world is that it's just a bunch of random stuff. There is no overall design. It's just like, this is just how it is. And there's no overall meaning or purpose. And so he thinks that the task for philosophers is just to try and find a sense of peace and sort of tranquility in a chaotic life. And that's a lot of what he tries to recommend. Then the Stoics, they like the Aristotle's idea that everything has a purpose, but they kind of take it one step further, and they kind of, at least Zeno of Citium says that the whole universe is like one divine creature. It's quite an odd view, But the idea is that there's a sort of God's presence throughout the cosmos. It unifies everything, but they're still monists, so they're not dualists. So it's a complicated view. And the Stoics also emphasized a lot on like trying to live well, and they had a lot of ideas about self-control and how you control your emotions. In some ways, they were some of the most sophisticated philosophers about controlling your emotions. Although, yeah, exactly how good their suggestions are is kind of up for debate. Finally, there's the idea of the models of the universe. Aristotle had argued that the Earth is the center of the universe, and that kind of idea was taken by Ptolemy and also by Hipparchus, and they kind of made more of a science of that. And they had all the observations of the planet, of the stars, and the motions of the stars and the planets, and they tried to explain how that worked if the Earth is the center of the universe. That is quite a difficult task because you know, the motions, the planets sort of move in irregular orbits, so they had to kind of come up with all sorts of theories about that. But that system lasted for well over 1,000 years. So it became pretty important. So Aristotle certainly was highly important.